I am really, really excited for the conversation today. So I'm Michael. I'm one of the co-founders, co-CEOs of Recast. Welcome everyone to the Marketing Measurement Coffee Break. We are thrilled to be welcoming Gufeng Zhou to be here with us today. Gufeng is on the marketing science team at Meta. Many of y'all know who he is. He is the creator, DS lead, and PM of Project Robyn, the open source MMM tool. We're excited to have him today. We're going to have a really deep conversation about some of the choices that Gufeng has and trade-offs that Gufeng has had to make as he's thought about Project Robyn and an open source MMM tool. We're going to go deep on different modeling philosophies, different ways to approach this problem. And as always, we will not be doing any pitching. So we're going to keep this really focused on the content. If you have questions, please drop them into the chat. Myself and my team will be keeping an eye on the chat. As good questions come up, we'll sort of feed them in. So please definitely drop them there. So Gufeng, welcome. Excited to have you. Without further ado, I want to get to my first question, which is MMM models, media mix modeling in general, they tend to be really, really powerful, right? They're very flexible modeling frameworks, which experienced modelers know means that they're also very easy to abuse, right? If you have enough parameters, you can overfit to anything. In your experience, what are some of the common mistakes that you see people making when they're using Robyn or these other really flexible frameworks? I would love to just hear your opinion on that.
Thanks for the question. So the common pitfalls, I would say this, with the age of slightly more automated MMMs, right, models, the danger is actually even greater to misuse this kind of model, because when you had a team of modeler, right, back then, right, you'll be, of course, more cautious about, are we having the right data set, right? We assess, is there any measurement issue in terms of, the numbers are right? And then, you put a lot of energy into feature selection, right? And then put a lot of energy into, of course, dealing with multicollinearity and all that kind of stuff, right? Ensure that, how about auto regression there, right? You put a lot of energy there, right? And what is the trend, right? How do I calculate seasonality? And then now everything's, this kind of stuff is a lot automated now, right? And it makes it easier to misuse this kind of tool, actually, right? That you don't really think about, what is actually let's say the right structure for my data set, right? Do I need to consider maybe upper lower funnel, maybe in my modeling? A lot of this might be just kind of fading because the user friendliness of these tools. So I would say this, right? That it's more of the SaaS mindset that people goes in and goes out, right? Which is great, democratizing the technique is our purpose as well. But at the same time, right, we know that the industry, especially from the more academical side, is pledging for more cautious, more domain knowledge, more of the statistical knowledge into this, and we actually agree with it.
So I think that makes a lot of sense. And sort of to summarize, this is a pattern that we've seen, and even I myself have fallen into. Like, you write the script to do the thing, and it does the thing automatically for you, and you forget to check all of the inputs. And I think in some of the Slack chats that I'm in talking about MMM, you definitely get this sense that there are people who are trying to just like take a data set, feed it into the algorithm, and get something on the other side. But that doesn't always work, especially in domains that are as complex as media mix modeling. So practically, I guess, what advice would you give to someone who's like, I don't know, a senior analyst, data scientist, they have some skills, but maybe don't have a lot of background in media mix modeling? Like, what advice would you give them? What are the practical things that they can do to avoid falling into some of these traps?
Yes, well, one thing top of mind would be that talk to your media team. Like, this is what we've seen, that many data scientists, they might be equipped with a lot of skills, but not necessarily a lot of knowledge or hands-on on the ground experience. And then and they probably don't have the structure internally to naturally approach these kind of media teams. What happens is that they're missing a lot of context for setting up right models, right? For example, the context of, maybe a certain channel is being over-invested, right? Because they know that they have a lot of frequency there, there are a lot of this kind of inherent knowledge that you probably won't get out just by getting a CSV file, right? So this is quite important for modelers or tool users, right? To talk to your media team. They are your most important stakeholder in a sense, and get as much domain knowledge out as possible. And this will compensate a lot for what's missing, right? And then of course if possible, talk to a experienced modeler as well. What kind of other things that he would look into. And then it's in this context, then basically guarantee a more comprehensive, but also like guarantee the most out of the, let's say, a causal structure in this sense, right? So yes, that's very important.
I think that is such great advice, and you said it so simply. Like, talk to the media team, talk to the marketers. We at Recast, we hire a bunch of data scientists from academia, right? They have worked doing very advanced modeling, but don't necessarily have a background in marketing. And often when they start at Recast, they have a very simplified idea of how marketing works. And they're like, oh yeah, you just put dollars in and then ads go out and then people convert. But it's like all of these different marketing channels are so much more complex than that. The way you can do different bidding on different platforms, the way media is bought in different ways, like TV can be bought at upfront or it can be bought at remnant, and that's really different strategically, and how it's priced. And there's so much detail here. And you're totally right that as a modeler, you really need to understand that detail and how it works for your business and your context in order to be able to, operate these models correctly. Changing topics a little bit. Most of the other open source MMM tools that have been gaining in popularity, whether that's lightweight MMM or the one that the PyMC Labs team have been developing, they're Bayesian in need. But Robyn isn't. So Robyn sort of stands out in being not a Bayesian-based model. I'd love to hear from you. How do you think about the trade-offs of those different approaches? And sort of how did you land on the approach that y'all ended up taking at Robyn?
Yes. So we're actually not very much preferring in general, like preferring or you're not preferring Bayesian models. So the comparison when you talk about Bayesian, and the other side is always frequentist, right? It's like there's a fight over eternal fight between these two school of actually philosophies, right? It's not just statistics. So in this sense, we've made this decision out of very concrete reasons that maybe very few of you guys might know that there was a Robyn 1.0 version, right? That we beta tested with very limited users, actually alpha tested. That was not it was not looking like closely like what it is today. So we were not having the multi-objective functions. So we are basically optimizing for just for the smallest prediction error, so to say, right? And then found out that the results were of course often not interpretable, right? And then we started to think that how could we improve this point? Because especially as a manual modeler, you would know that you would tweak certain things, right? You make certain decisions so that you get a halfway okay model out, right? By doing that, you're actually having a lot of inherent criteria, and they could be borrowed to other users, other modelers, right? So they're this common ground. So we are trying to extract that and basically realize that, okay, there's actually a business side of goals, objectives that we generally do not account for when we model, right? So the result needs to make sense. So the idea was behind how could we account for that part, right? Make it more closer to the business reality in this sense. And this is, of course, a very big task, right? But we did borrow it from the field optimization, right? Which is, I guess officially part of the AI, but in the end, it's part of, it's an optimization problem with multiple objectives. So we're dealing with a real life problem that is just not simply just forecasting what is the most accurate, but we need to explain things. We deal with inference. It's very important, if not more important, right, for MMMs. So we need to have a objective in the optimization that accounts for that part. Right? This is actually, I remember Recast had this blog post that was, of that author, right, that was saying optimizing for politics. That is that. We call it the decomposition distance, right? The decom RSSD. And that accounts for, or let's say this in the practice, it eliminates those very extreme results. And we have seen this works in the practice quite well, right? So of course, we also earned a lot of critics that it might bias the result, but we will have a different view on what is bias here, right? Because when you're optimizing towards more than one goals, then the bias needs to actually be redefined as well. It's not just the simple statistical bias anymore. But altogether, we've decided to do multi-objective optimization, and then that would require, or say, what would be the combination of an evolutionary algorithm and multiple objectives plus Bayesian with a lot of burn-ins, right? So with a lot of simulations beforehand. So it's actually out of the practical reasons. We don't want to do iterations on top of iterations that will explode the runtime a bit, right? So it's out of that reason. But of course, for me personally, I do believe that there's a truth of your performance, right? There's out there somewhere, right, in the universe is truth of performance. I would like to think about things like that in the sense that capturing that truth, basically the concept of confidence interval. For me, just personally, right? It kind of explains this process a bit better. Then of course credible interval is easier to interpret, of course, right? In a sense, but it explains things in uncertainty, and this is very philosophical though. But our main reason was indeed that we do not want to explode the computation time.
Computation can definitely be really tricky, especially in these really large multidimensional spaces. And I think you're like, there's just trade-offs on all sides. You have to choose what you're going to optimize for and choose what's most important for you, because we don't have infinite computation. And so you have to figure out like exactly what corners are going to get cut in whatever algorithm you're going to be developing. I want to switch topics again a little bit. A lot of people are talking right now about incrementality testing, whether that's geotesting or conversion lift studies in the Meta platform, and how do you how that can integrate with media mix modeling. I'd love to hear, in your opinion, what is the best practice for using these techniques together, if at all?
Yes, so we know that all the major players in the industry are advocating for use all your powers and do all the techniques, right? We have the trinity of marketing, that is attribution, we have MMM, and we have experimentation, right? So it is right that at this time, right, of changes, right, you want to use all the techniques because they all have strength and they all have their weaknesses, right? You probably get the best out of it when you're using all. But then, of course, it comes the question of how do you rectify between them, right? How do you calibrate between them, right? So at Meta, we believe that experimentation is the golden standard, right? Of course, academically, it's impossible to exactly measure the causal effect, right? It's just academically not impossible. Even randomization has a random number generator behind, and you can argue that it's not random. But we're not to talk about those kind of theoretical levels. We're talking about the best you can get, and that's what gold standard means, right? The best you can get. And then we do believe that experimentation in marketing is a gold standard, right? So that is the closest you could get to causal effect. And it is the strongest causal inference method. So we also distinguish the word causal inference from causal effect, because sometimes these two aspects get mixed up, and then a solution claims to be causal. They're doing a little bit of causal inference, but claiming full of the causal effect credit, right? So that would be something that would say overselling a little bit, right? But in general, we do believe that experimentation is the gold standard, especially when you're having a very powerful test like meta conversion lift study, of course, based on millions of IDs and devices, and is of course a very powerful randomization that you usually won't get, right? Geo experiments are very practical, right? Is of course way less powerful due to the number of observations that's the samples that are possible, right? Geographical units. You can't compete that with the millions of samples as IDs and humans and devices. But nevertheless, right? It's the next closer thing that you can do. And then of course, so we do believe there's hierarchy of results here. But then again, experiments are limited, bounded for a certain time, right? You can measure a couple of weeks, that's it, right? It's a point estimate over that week, that's it, right? And then you want to have, of course, like over a longer period, and it's expensive in the sense that, well, sometimes you need to afford a bigger holdout. Not every media team is happy to hear that, oh, I cannot reach 30% of my audience, what are you saying, right? For 4 weeks, right? Maybe this is before Christmas, and that's, gonna be, right? Preventing them to hitting their goals, right? So there's a lot of course, practical difficulties there as well. So we understand that you need other techniques to compensate for that. So when you're doing this, and we do support that, but you need to take into account the scope of differences between these techniques. So for example, MMM includes short-term effect, and at least we're refusing to call it long-term effect. So we just call it carryover because it's not long-term. You have short-term effect and carryover effect in MMM included inherently, right? All MMM do have those, and experiments, conversion lift studies do not, right? So because it's a short period and it does not account for historical carryover into that period. And this is very important context. That means when you're calibrating, you need to know that, well, maybe before the study, you had a big campaign for a month, right? And then you have a lot of users buying within your study period. They're because of that campaign before, and not because the spend that you have within the study, right? MMM is accounting for this part, and the experiment not. So there's an inherent difference. You need to account for this.
So
otherwise,
I mean, I totally recognize the problem. It seems like a really hard problem. How do you account for that? Do you have to just do like a rule of thumb, or look at the carryover effect from the MMM and sort of back into it? Or like, what's the recommendation practically for how to make that happen?
Well, practically would be just something like, if you have like a comparable study, first of all, right, you need to measure the same span more or less as in modeling in MMM. If that is given, then the easier thing to just look at the results, right? Do like a manual comparison, right? Can you explain the difference, right? Can it be explained by the missing carryover effect, right? Do a qualitative judgment there. So if this is the case, and technically speaking, you could just easy way would be just doing a multiplier, right? So if I measure 100 in lift, and it's 130 in MMM, so it's 1.3, right? That's easy. But then you want to account for it more systematically. Actually, Robyn does that actually. So we separate the modeled decomposition, so the contribution, into the immediate and carryover part. So it will be only calibrating the immediate part of the effect. So leave out the carryover, for example. Right, but this is just one of the many scope differences. It's not impossible to account for all of them, but at least you want to make sure that you account for one or two of these aspects to be a bit more accurate.
So I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think you were the author on this blog post that I reference all of the time, that like sort of it has this great illustration of the different carryover effects from the different time periods and how that interacts with like what the experiment is measuring and what something like an MMM is measuring. So I'll say everyone should go read this blog post. It's really, really great. But I think the overarching point here is that as analysts and scientists, we just always need to be really thoughtful about exactly what are we measuring, right? And I think like it's really to say like, oh, it's an experiment and it's an MMM and they're the same, but they're often not. And there are these very subtle differences in measurement and exactly what is being measured that you just have to be thoughtful about. and it's easy to get mixed up and get misled. And this is why, we have jobs, I guess, is because like this stuff is hard and you need to actually think about it. And I think that for me is like the main thing to keep reminding myself always.
Yes, totally. So, I mean, in the end, right, we do believe that, well, the industry has been evolving, since all the priority changes, and then these kind of problems now surface more, right? So it's a process of the industry now basically evolving together. So in this sense, I won't, take it too hard on yourself, kind of just say, well, but now we're starting to consider these problems. So, so it's a good development, right? And we might look into even more scope differences and solve for that as well, right? Account for that and maybe integrate them into our solutions as well, so that measurement becomes more comparable between different techniques, right? And the education of the market takes time, right? It always takes a lot of time actually, right? So this is actually a process. So actually we are happy to see that this is happening. That the post got read by people. That is it's not it has values, and then it got picked up. We talked to other providers as well, and they're like, oh, we are actually doing similar things in a different ways, but now put into more consolidated context, and this is that, right? So scope differences of different measurement techniques. So I think it's a good development in general. Yeah,
totally agree. Last question that I wanted to ask. People have been talking about triangulation. You've mentioned it, and I think in the context of lift tests, it's pretty easy to reason about because a well-run experiment, as you mentioned, is the gold standard, right? It gives us sort of because of our ability to manipulate the intervention, it makes the causal inference piece a lot easier, right? Because you don't have to make as many assumptions. The third leg of the triangle, which is like multi-touch attribution or digital tracking, I think is a little bit harder to reason about. I think, there's a very real sense in which it does make sense to sort of calibrate with what you're seeing in digital tracking. Like there is signal there, but I often struggle with like how much, right? Because there are times when it's going to be really biased and times when maybe it actually is, a really good signal. How do you think about incorporating that information from MTA or in-platform metrics or whatever sort of digital tracking into this scientific learning process, whether that's experimentation or MMM?
Yes, I mean, attribution does have its values. Even today, I would say this, right? I don't agree with those that say, oh, this is just worthless. It's not true, because, for example, for certain industries, it was and still is a very good proxy to causality, right? To incrementality. For certain industries, like gaming is always the one that I mentioned. But because of the conversion path is pretty short, right? So the type of conversion they're measuring, right, is quite quick. So the app install is the most important one, right? And this result in that the last click or last touch attribution is a good enough proxy, right? And it's cheap to implement. It's really fast and really granular. So you can't you can't say no to this kind of solution for your product, right? So, and this is actually proven over and over again that for these kind of industries, it's a very good proxy. The correlation is very high. So there's no reason to not using it. This is the first point. The second point would be that, like, even for, let's say, well, products with longer purchase cycle and all that, of course, it's not ideal, but MMM does have a granularity problem, right? We don't get to the granularity campaign level, even lower creatives. It's almost impossible in MMM to do that, right? And then where do you get otherwise the campaign level or even creative level numbers? They are in some kind of attributional models inside, right? Be it on platform, be it your own solutions or third-party solutions, right? And over there, you get a sense of what is what, right? And with domain knowledge, again, right, you account for maybe, oh, this is a rather upper funnel channel, so it might be missing a lot of view-through conversion, so somehow account for that maybe. But this does compensate the granularity, and then by that, with extension, the actionability for advertisers, right? Yep. They sometimes do want to have a number on creatives, and then, and it's rightly so. So they would need any some source of, and this is almost the only source of a number for that, right? So that's why we need to be more cautious about what kind of numbers you're looking at. But to say that these numbers have no value is not true.
I totally agree. I would never say that those numbers have no value. I think you summed it up really well. And I have to talk about it less, even like gaming is a really good example where, I agree that attribution gives a lot of signal. I also just think that like for smaller companies, right? If you're a small e-commerce company and you're only advertising on Meta or only advertising on Meta and Google, like last touch attribution is really good. Like it's like that's like a really good indicator of what's actually driving your business. And it's only when you get bigger and more complicated where you need some of these other tools and where the flaws in attribution start to show. And then I think you're exactly right that especially for like campaign level and creative level analysis, it absolutely, like these statistical models are just not going to be able to tell you anything. They're just not going to have enough power. So totally 100% agree with that. And with that, we are out of time. So Gufeng, because he is in Singapore, has to go start his day. So, he is about to go off to work. And some of the other people on the call are about to go to bed. So thank you, everyone, for making the time to join us. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Gufeng. A couple of quick calls to action for folks. If you haven't already, give us both a follow on LinkedIn. Both of us are always talking about marketing measurement, marketing analytics, causality, MMM. And I think most of the people on this call have probably already checked out Robyn MMM, but if you haven't, there's a ton of great resources on the website, a bunch of interesting documentation, theoretical discussion of some of these really important points that we talked about today. So highly recommend everyone dig into that. Gufeng, thank you so much. Go off and enjoy your Thursday.
Thank you as well. So yeah, talk to you soon.